Hello students. So today we are going to continue with our discussion on open channel flows. We'll be talking about gradually varied flows in this lecture. So let us get to the very essence of what we mean by gradually varied flow. So far we've been discussing in the context of open channel flow about uniform flows, right? But the reality is that in most practical situations, uniform flow may not always be observed, right? So what we typically observe in most situations is steady non-uniform flow, right? With gradual changes in water surface elevation. This kind of a flow, if I have, then that is what we call as gradually varied flow. Now remember that I have said it is steady non-uniform flow, right? So when I say steady, immediately the implication is that there is no change in the flow rate with respect to time, right? But it is non-uniform, which means the water surface elevation is changing as a function of space, not as a function of time, right? So if you have steady non-uniform flow in which there are gradual changes in the water surface elevation, then that would be classified as a gradually varied flow, right? So now what causes this kind of gradually varied flow to happen? Typically it is caused by either changes in the bottom slope or changes in the cross section, right? So when these kind of changes happens, it results in a whenever these kind of either there's a change in the bottom slope or there's a change in the cross section. When this change happens, it will cause a gradually varied flow. So some typical examples of gradually varied flow are, for example, there's a backwater caused by a dam, right? So when I have a dam, it raises the water surface elevation, right? So if I move far away from the dam, up in the upstream direction, the effect of the dam is not felt. But as I approach the dam, the water surface keeps building up and up and up until it reaches the dam where it reaches the maximum height. So this is what is called a backwater, right? So the dam raises the water level, but if I go sufficiently far away from the dam, the effect of the dam is not felt, right? But as I approach the dam, as I get closer and closer, the water surface gradually starts to change from the river's natural water level to the to the high water surface elevation that is caused by the construction of a dam. Sometimes it's also caused by a weir. We will briefly discuss what a weir is in the coming lectures. A weir is also similar to a dam. It is basically a device that is constructed across a river for two purposes. One is to store some water and the other is to measure the flow rate of water. Okay, so it is similar to a dam, but maybe not as big as a dam. A dam might typically be many meters tall. Weirs typically tend to be smaller structures. So, but a weir can also cause what is called a backwater. Okay, so that is an example, a typical example of a gradually varied profile. Other examples are if there's a sudden drop in the channel, right? Then there will be what is called a drawdown, right? So if there's a sudden drop in the channel due to whatever, there may be a topographical change or whatever, right? So then the water surface elevation gradually changes as the water approaches the drawdown, the drop. Okay, this change in the water surface elevation is what is called drawdown. Okay, so these are some common examples of gradually varied flow. We'll continue with the discussion on gradually varied flow. Okay, so the interesting thing to note in the case of gradually varied profiles is that the bed slope, the water surface slope, and the energy slope are all different, right? This is unlike in the case of uniform flow, where the bed slope, the water surface slope, and the energy slope are all the same, right? If you remember from our earlier lecture, we had a bed slope. By definition, uniform flow means the depth of flow at any cross section in that uniform flow condition will be exactly the same. So if the depth of flow is exactly the same, then naturally the water surface will be parallel to the bed slope, right? And then of course the energy slope, because y is constant along the channel, then v square by 2g is also constant along the channel. So the total energy at any point in the or the specific energy at any point in the channel will be will be exactly equal. So then naturally, in the case of uniform flow, all of these three slopes will be exactly the same. Now, by the very definition of gradually varied flow, we are saying that the water surface slope is changing as a function of space. So then naturally, the bed slope and the water surface slope and the energy slope, all of these will be different from each other. Okay. So as I said earlier, so the gradually varied flow is caused by changes in the bottom slope or changes in the cross section. Now, if I want to analyze gradually varied flow profiles, what I typically do is I use some kind of an approximate analysis, right? And this kind of approximate approach is possible if these changes, whatever changes are happening, whether it is change in the bottom slope or change in the cross section, if these changes are small and not sudden, then an approximate analysis is possible to understand these gradually varied flow profiles, right? But this whole analysis will be subjected to certain assumptions. So the assumptions essentially are, most important one is that the pressure distribution at any point in a gradually varied flow profile is hydrostatic. Okay, and then the second assumption, very important, is that the velocity at any cross section can be approximated by the uniform flow equation, right? So this is why I said the uniform flow approximation is so important. So although we have come to gradually varied flow, we still say that the velocity at any given section is approximated by the uniform flow equation. Now, and of course, with the understanding that we use the energy slope in the uniform flow equation. Okay, we'll come back to that. Okay, so why is it that we are able to use the we still use the uniform flow equation to estimate the velocity? How is it that we can use the uniform flow equation although we are saying the flow is gradually varied? It is not uniform flow, but we are still able to use the uniform flow equation. Why is that? Number one, because as I said, this is an approximate approach to understanding these flow profiles. So in any approximation, there will be some error. So this uniform flow approximation may also be an error in this gradually varied flow profile analysis. But it is not an inappropriate assumption to make, simply because by the very definition of gradually varied flows, we have considered that the water surface profile is changing gradually, right? So therefore, if it is changing gradually at a point, right, locally, you can say that the variation is so slow that you can almost approximate it as a uniform flow equation, right? So that is the thinking or the logic behind using this uniform flow equation, even though the flow is gradually varied, right? So when I say velocity approximated by the uniform flow equation with the energy slope, what I mean is simply this. Okay, so you remember the Manning's equation, V equal to 1 by n r power 2 by 3 s naught per half. But instead of using s naught per half, I use sf per half, right? So this sf per half is simply the energy slope, right? Just like S naught refers to the bed slope, SF refers to the energy slope. Like I said here, bed slope, water surface slope, and energy slope. So this SF refers to the energy slope, right? In the case of uniform flow, we would have used S naught, because in the case of uniform flow, S naught and SF are one and the same, right? But in the case of gradually varied flow, the one difference that we incorporate is that instead of using the bed slope S naught, we use the energy slope in the Manning's equation. Okay, so that is the only distinction between uniform flow and gradually varied flow in this context. All right. Okay. So now let us just consider gradually varied flow that's happening in a channel, right? So I have at a certain cross section, I have a flow depth of y and a velocity of v. Then if I consider a channel length of just dx, right? If I move a certain distance dx away, the water surface profile, as you can clearly see, is not parallel to the bed slope, right? The water surface is not parallel to the bed slope. So the water surface elevation, if I move a distance dx, has changed from y to y plus dy, right? So the water surface profile has changed to y plus dy, and the velocity at that cross section has also changed to v plus dv, right? Because we are assuming that the flow is steady. All right. So now if I consider that the bed slope is s naught, then the difference in elevation between these two sections at a distance of dx from each other would simply be S naught times dx, right? Assuming that this point in the cross section is at assuming that the datum passes through this point, then the difference in elevation between these 2 points will simply be S naught times dx, right? That's fairly straightforward. Okay, and then what if I also include the velocity head component at these two points in the cross section? So at this point, the velocity head will be v square by 2g, and at this point, the velocity head will be v square by 2g plus dv square by 2g, right? So because the velocity has also changed to v plus dv, the velocity head also changes a little bit. All right. So now I have v square by 2g and v square by 2g plus dv square by 2g. Now, if you look at the summation of these 3 components, right? So this is the elevation head, this is the pressure head, and this is the velocity head. So the summation of these 3 should constitute the total energy at this cross section, right? Similarly, I have the total energy at this cross section, and the elevation head becomes 0 because the datum is passing through this point, right? So I can join these 2 points. What is this line? This line is something that we are familiar with. This line is the total energy line, right? So we call it the energy grade line, EGL, right? Why is it the EGL? Because at cross section 1 at this point, it is a summation of datum head, pressure head, and velocity head. Similarly here, it is datum head, but of course datum head is 0 because my datum is passing through this point. Datum head plus velocity head, plus velocity head plus pressure head. So this is the total energy at this point. This is the total energy at the upstream point. So if I connect these 2 lines, that becomes the EGL, or the energy grade line, right? So now, as I was saying, this energy grade line has got a slope, right? So if I draw a horizontal at this point, then I can refer to this slope as the friction slope, right? This friction slope is what is causing the loss between point 1 and 2 in this cross section. So that's why it's called the friction slope with the symbol SF, the letter S suffix F. So the F in this stands for friction, right? So friction slope. Then naturally this distance, the difference between these 2 points is SF times dx, right? So this SF times dx is the amount of energy that has been lost in this gradually varied flow flowing from point x to x plus dx, right? So that's fairly straightforward. Now, in this scenario, can I not write the Bernoulli equation for the flow happening from point 1 to 2? I can. So let us do that. So Bernoulli equation will simply be y plus v square by 2g plus s naught times dx. So that is the total energy at point 1 equal to y plus dy plus v square by 2g plus dv square by 2g plus sf dx, right? Correct. So this sf dx is something like your friction losses that has happened in moving from point 1 to point 2, right? So here you can see this equation, there's multiple terms that can get cancelled out. Y is on both sides, that gets cancelled out. V square by 2g on both sides gets cancelled out. And then I'm left with s naught dx plus equal to dy plus dv square by 2g plus sf dx. So if I divide this equation by dx on both sides, I'm left with dy by dx plus d by dx of v square by 2g equal to s naught minus sf. So this is fairly straightforward, right? I've just taken this equation, cancelled out the terms, and then divided both sides by dx. I get this expression. Now this d by dx of v square by 2g, I would like all of you to try to attempt to find out what d by dx of v square by 2g is. What is v square by 2g? V square, you can write it as q square by a square, right? So I would like all of you to attempt to solve this or find out what the d by dx of q square by a square will be. Okay, and then you'll find that it's something very interesting, which we are very accustomed to in the context of what we've been doing so far. All right, so then I simplify this entire expression. I get something that looks like this: dy by dx equal to s naught minus sf divided by 1 minus Froude number square. Okay, so this 1 minus Froude number square has come about by simplifying this d by dx of v square by 2g. So I strongly urge all of you to try to attempt to do this, solve this, and then see if you're able to get this expression. It's fairly straightforward, right? We all know q square by a square. A is a function of x, so you can go ahead and do that. So you'll get Froude number square. Okay, so we get this very nice expression dy by dx, which is the slope of the water surface, right? Dy by dx is essentially the slope of the water surface. That we are saying is equal to S naught minus SF divided by 1 minus Froude number square, right? So when I look at this equation, there are two things that immediately strike me, right? What happens when y tends to y naught, right? Y naught is the normal depth. If you remember, as y tends to y naught, dy by dx will tend to 0, right? From this equation, I would like to see if you can find out why this statement is true. As y tends to y naught, dy by dx tends to 0. Please try to come up with the reasoning for this when we meet next time on Friday. All right. So, and otherwise I'll explain in class anyway, but I would like to you to attempt to understand why it is that dy by dx tends to 0 in this case. Similarly, if I were to say y was tending to critical depth yc, what would happen? If y tends to yc, then the Froude number will tend to 1, right? If the Froude number tends to 1, then the denominator tends to 0, which means dy by dx will tend to infinity, right? So as y tends to yc, dy by dx tends to infinity. So this is fairly straightforward. You can see that. So, which is telling you that if the flow depth approaches critical depth in an open channel in a gradually varied flow profile, right, the curvature of the water surface becomes very high, right? As the flow approaches critical depth, the curvature of the water surface becomes very high. So typically what we do is we don't solve, you know, uh, a gradually varied flow profile to try to understand this dy by dx very close to the critical depth, right? Because by the very definition, it is supposed to be a gradually varied flow profile where the water surface profile curvature is very small. But in this, what this equation is telling us is that if y starts to tend towards the critical depth, then dy by dx becomes very large, which goes against the very definition of our gradually varied flow profile. So in these special situations, we tend to assume that it approaches. We don't try to find out how long what the distance will be over which it will tend towards yc. Okay, so because the curvature starts to become very large, so we typically don't go very close to that high curvature area. We tend to remain in areas where dy by dx is relatively small. Okay, all right. So now classification of slopes is what I would like to talk about. So now this seems like a little bit of a different topic, but this has a lot of relevance to what we're talking about in terms of gradually varied flow profiles, right? So because if you remember correctly, we did say that gradually varied flow profiles happen when there is a change in the bed slope, right? So it is important to understand what role the bed slope plays in the gradually varied flow profile, right? So if you remember, critical depth of flow occurs when Froude number is equal to 1, which is the condition for that is q square t by ga cube equal to 1, right? So if you notice in this equation q square t by ga cube equal to 1, you will see that there is no mention of the bed slope, right? So for a given flow rate, for a given channel cross section, A and T are fixed for a given channel cross section at a given flow rate, right? So it does not depend on depth. So the critical depth is independent of bed slope, right? You can see from this equation, the bed slope does not play a role in this. So whatever the bed slope may be, for a given flow rate, the critical depth will always happen at a certain depth, right? Because it is independent of the bed slope. On the other hand, normal depth, right, y naught, which we denote with the symbol y naught, normal depth depends on the bed slope, right? If you remember Manning's equation or even Chezy's equation, it has got v equal to 1 by n r power 2 by 3 s naught power half, right? So if I know the flow rate and I want to solve for y, or the normal depth y naught, r is a function of y naught. And if I know the flow rate, right, so the only when you solve for y naught, you will notice that it depends on what the s naught is, right? So therefore normal depth is dependent on bed slope. So now on this basis, we come up with a certain classification of slopes. So what we do is that in those situations where my y naught, or the normal depth of flow is greater than the critical depth of flow, in those situations, we say that the slope is mild, okay, and it is denoted by the symbol M. Okay, in those situations where the normal depth of flow is exactly equal to the critical depth of flow, those we call critical slopes, and we denote it with the symbol capital C. Okay. Similarly, when normal depth of flow is less than critical depth of flow, we call it a steep slope. Okay, and we denote it with the symbol S. There are two other kinds of slopes. One is a horizontal slope, which means S naught is 0. But in this case, uniform flow cannot be sustained, right? So if I put 0 over here, you'll get V equal to 0. So uniform flow cannot be sustained uh, in the case of a horizontal slope, but it can still, uh, horizontal slopes can sometimes be encountered in the case of gradually varied flow profiles. So this horizontal slope also we consider in our analysis, and we denote it with the symbol H. Similarly, there's the other possibility of an adverse slope, right? That I may have, for a short distance, I may have a slope that is going against the direction of flow, right? So if I have flow happening from left to right, but the slope increasing in that direction, that is what is called an adverse slope. Okay, adverse means opposite, right? So it is opposite to the direction of flow. But this cannot obviously extend for very long distances. In this case also, uniform flow cannot be sustained because S naught, by this definition, S naught will be negative, right? So adverse slope is something that is typically not encountered very frequently in open channels, but but there are some situations where it is impossible to avoid an adverse slope. So that also we include in this classification, and we call it, we denote it by the symbol capital A, right? So these are the different possible types of slopes that are possible, right? Depending on the relationship between y naught and yc, which means the relationship between normal depth and critical depth. If normal depth is greater than critical depth, I have mild slope. If normal depth is less than critical depth, I have steep slope. And if the normal depth and critical depth are one and the same, then I have critical slope. And then of course I have horizontal slope, which is zero slope, and adverse slope, which is a negative gradient. Okay, so these are the possible slopes that are possible. All right. Now, these continuing with that classification. So now let us say I have a mild slope over here, right? So by definition, in a mild slope, the normal depth of flow will be greater than the critical depth of flow. So what I have done is, okay, this figure comes from Professor Subramania's book, Flow and Open Channels, right? So what I have done is I have divided up the region above the slope into three regions, right? So this line is the NDL, or the normal depth level. This line is the CDL, or the critical depth level. Okay. So I have done that for a mild slope. In a mild slope, the normal depth is greater than the critical depth. So naturally, NDL will be above CDL. In a steep slope, normal depth is below critical depth level. So then in this case, NDL is below CDL. In a critical slope, NDL and CDL are one and the same, right? So there's just one line, there's not two lines. In the case of horizontal slopes, normal depth is not defined. But even in this case, you can still compute a critical depth, right? Because q square t by ga cube does not depend on the slope at all, right? So you can still come up with a critical depth level over here, CDL, right? And then similarly for adverse slope, there's a critical depth level, right? So what I've done is I have divided up the region above the slope into three, right? So region one is the portion above the topmost line. In the case of mild slope, the topmost line is the NDL, or the normal depth level. In the case of a steep slope, the topmost line is the CDL, or the critical depth level, right? So region one is above the topmost line. In the case of critical slope, region one is above NDL or CDL, which are both one and the same. In the case of horizontal bed and adverse slope, the what is that? The normal depth level is not defined, right? So, and in fact, you can think of it as infinity, right? Normal depth cannot happen in adverse slope or horizontal slope. So basically, flow will basically stagnate, which means the flow depth will go very, very, very high, right? So then that topmost line does not exist in the case of horizontal bed and in the case of adverse slope. Okay, so that region 1 does not show up in this horizontal slope and in adverse slope. Then the region between the topmost line and the bottommost line, right, between NDL and CDL, as the case may be, we call it region 2, right? So I have region 2 in the case of mild slope between NDL and CDL. I have region 2 between CDL and NDL in the case of steep slope. Region 2 disappears in critical slope because uh, those two lines are lying on top of each other, because NDL and CDL are one and the same. Region 2 is the region above CDL in the case of both horizontal slope and adverse slope, because if you think about it, y naught is something like infinity in both these cases. And then region 3 is the region between the bottom line and the bed slope, right? The bottom line can be CDL in the case of mild slope, or NDL in the case of steep slope, or NDL slash CDL in the case of critical slope, and CDL in the case of uh, horizontal or adverse slope. Now, why am I doing all this, right? So objective is basically to say that if the flow happens in the region above the topmost line, right, and if it happens to be a mild slope, then that gradually varied flow profile will be called an M1 profile. Why will it be called M1? Because it happens in a mild slope, so M, and it happens in region 1, so therefore it will be M1. If it happens in this region, okay, if it happens in this region, it will be called an S2 gradually varied flow profile. Why will it be called S2? Because it happens on a steep slope and it happens in region 2, so it will be called an S2 profile. Similarly, in these circumstances, depending on which region it falls under, it will be called M1, M2, M3, or S1, S2, S3, C1 or C3, C2 doesn't exist, or H2, H3, or A2, A3, right? So here again, there's a table available from Professor Subramania's book. I've just included that table over here. So in the case of, so here it lists all the different possible types of slope possible, different types of flow profiles possible. So here I have all the slopes listed and all the regions. So if you remember, mild and steep have all three regions, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Critical has only 1 and 3. Horizontal and adverse have only 2 and 3, right? So if the flow is happening in region 1, that means the flow depth is greater than normal depth, which is greater than critical depth. So y greater than y naught greater than yc. If the flow is happening in region 2 in a mild slope, then normal depth is greater than the depth of flow, which is greater than yc, right? Y naught greater than y greater than yc. And that would be called an M2 curve, just like the first one would be called an M1 curve, right? And then the third one is if y naught is greater than yc greater than y, then it is then the flow is happening in region 3, so that would be called an M3 profile. Okay, similarly for steep slope, critical slope, horizontal, and adverse slope, right? I would strongly request you all to just go through these two slides are very important. Just go through them and try to understand what these mean, and and how these uh, why this is relevant to what we are discussing. The reason we are dividing it up into these different regions, if you remember in one of the earlier slides, I had mentioned that when y approaches y naught, when it approaches the normal depth of flow, it becomes asymptotic, right? As y tends to y naught, the surface, the dy by dx, the curvature of the water surface profile becomes, it asymptotically approaches towards this normal depth, right? And similarly, when it approaches critical depth level, dy by dx tends to infinity. So it is usually observed that the profiles do not cross across regions, right? So a profile will either be an M1 profile or it will be an M2 or an M3. A profile cannot go from across these regions. Okay, so that is why we classify these into these different regions, and then we are able to understand how these flow profiles behave. Okay, so that is the reason for these two this table and this figure over here. All right, so I would request you to spend some time going through these two figures, the table and this figure. So now what we will do is we'll look at some typical examples of these gradually varied flow profiles. So to begin with, we have for a mild slope, you may have an M1 curve or an M2 curve or an M3 curve. If you notice, in both M2 and M3, there's a dotted line here. It's a solid line up to this point, and then as it approaches critical depth, if you remember, dy by dx tends to infinity. So we don't go near this zone of high curvature. So we just denote it with a dotted line. By definition, gradually varied flow profile means that the dy by dx is small, right? So we only go up to a point where dy by dx is still small. Once dy by dx starts increasing, we just denote it as a dotted line. The other thing to note in this is how it approaches the normal depth level. If you can see, this curve approaches the normal depth level asymptotically, the M2 curve or the M1 curve. Both of them approach the normal depth asymptotically. All right. So that would be a mild slope, the different possible curves in a mild slope. Similarly, for a steep slope, I have S1, S2, S3. Here again, if you notice S2 and S3, they tend towards the normal depth level with in an asymptotic manner. But as they approach the critical depth level, again here we resort to the dotted line, because the flow depth will tend to, the curvature will tend to become very, very high. Similarly, for critical slope, as I approach the critical slope, the flow depth and the curvature tends to become high, so I resort to a dotted line. All right. Similarly, with the case of horizontal and adverse slopes. Okay, so adverse slopes are very, very rare. Okay, it's very rare to find an adverse slope, and typically adverse slope will only be there for a short distance, because you can't sustain flow beyond a certain distance if the slope is not convenient, right? Remember that open channel flows, the flow is primarily gravity driven, right? So these are the different kinds of flow profiles that are possible. Okay, so now we'll solve a quick simple example to try to understand this concept. Okay, a rectangular channel with a bottom width of 4 meter and a slope of 0.0008 has a discharge of 1.5 cubic meters per second. In a gradually varied flow in this channel, the depth at a certain location is 0.3 meters. Assuming n equal to 0.016, determine the type of gradually varied flow profile. This problem is also from Professor Subramania's book. Okay, so now it's a fairly straightforward problem. We can very simply try to understand how to solve this problem. The first thing we do whenever we encounter a problem of this type is to determine the normal depth, right? So the normal depth, how do you solve for it? You just simply put in the Manning's equation, and then we try to solve for the normal depth, right? So Q is given, Manning's coefficient N is given 0.016. Area is known because I know the bottom width. I know it's a rectangular channel. I know the bottom width, and I know that the depth of flow is 0. Oh, sorry. We are trying to find out what the normal depth is, right? So we don't know Y. So we know B, but we don't know Y naught. Similarly, R, which is a function of B and Y naught, will remain unknown. S naught is given, right? So this is some slightly complicated equation to solve, but if you put in all the known terms, the only unknown is Y naught, which is the normal depth of flow. You can solve for it. Q is known, N is known, B, the bottom width is known, and S naught is known. The only unknown is Y naught. So you solve for it, you will get this. I'm not going through the calculations. I'll leave it to you. Y naught comes to about 0.426 meters, right? So that is the normal depth of flow in this channel. Then we determine the critical depth of flow. How do you do that? Simply use this equation, Q square T by GA cubed equal to 1. Q is known. T, which is the top width, is the same as bottom width because the channel is a rectangular channel, right? So T is the top width, Q square T by GA cubed equal to 1. This again, this A is a function of YC, which is the critical depth. So if you solve for YC, you will very easily get the critical depth as 0.243 meters, right? So now just looking at these two numbers, you should be able to figure out what kind of slope this is. Is this a mild slope? Is this a steep slope? Is this a critical slope? Is it, obviously it's not horizontal or adverse, but it is one of these three. Before we started solving this, even before we started solving this, we can already eliminate horizontal and adverse, because the slope is given to you. The slope is not 0, so therefore it's not horizontal. The slope is not negative, so therefore it's not adverse either, right? So it has to be one of mild, steep, or critical. Now that we have solved for the normal depth and critical depth, we see that they are not equal. So it can't be critical slope, right? Y0 and Yc are not the same. So therefore the slope is not critical. Therefore the slope must be either mild or steep. So if you go back and recollect what we spoke about earlier, mild is when the normal depth of flow is greater than the critical depth of flow. And steep happens when the normal depth of flow is less than the critical depth of flow. So when you look at this clearly, the normal depth of flow is greater than the critical depth of flow. So therefore, the channel slope is mild. Okay. All right. So we have finished half the problem. One is that we have found out what the slope of this problem is. So now we know that it is M. That the whatever the profile will be, it will be an M profile, but we don't know yet whether it will be an M1, M2, or M3 profile, right? So now look at the depth at a certain location is 0.3 meters. So it is in between Y0 and Yc. It's greater than Yc, but less than Y0, right? So what kind of, which region does this fall under? The region above the topmost line, which in this case is Y0, the normal depth level, is region 1. Region 3 is the region below the critical depth level, because this is a mild slope, right? So that is region 3. Between Y0 and Yc is region 2. And since this depth 0.3 is in between these two, right? Actual flow depth is 0.3 meters. So Y0 less than Y less than Yc. So therefore the profile, the gradually varied flow profile in this case is an M2 curve. Okay. In some textbooks, you may see it referred to as M2 without the subscript. Okay. But it means the same thing, right? So that's just, so that's a very simple problem that we can solve with this approach. All right. Okay. So now we'll quickly move on to the different situations under which these different gradually varied flow profiles happen. This again, I've taken from Professor Subramania's book. So where I have a change in slope happening, right? So suppose I have a situation where a mild slope meets a slope which is even milder. Okay. Then I have a scenario where I get an M1 curve. Okay. So I want you all to think about this, or how we get these, how we are able to arrive at these situations. When a mild slope meets a milder slope, why do we get an M1 curve? I want you to think about this, and we'll discuss this when we meet next time. Okay. Similarly, when a steep slope meets a steeper slope, we get an S2 curve. Okay. And then so on. When a milder slope meets a mild slope, what kind of curve do we get? This is an M2 curve. Okay. What is over here? A steeper slope meets a steep slope, we get an S3 curve, and so on. So there's so many different possibilities, right? So all of those are listed over here. Let us quickly, you can take a look at them, and then we'll discuss this when we meet in the class. Okay. So, and then if you have questions, you can ask me at that point. All right. Yeah. So there's so many different examples given in the textbook. So if you have access to the textbook, I would strongly encourage you to look at the textbook. There's some accompanying text that you can read, and that'll allow you to understand this a little bit more in detail if you're interested. All right. Okay. So now we'll move on to the final act. Right. We are interested in computing the gradually varied flow profile. Okay. So imagine I have some gradually varied flow happening in such a manner. I have a bed slope of a certain slope, and then I have a water surface which is gradually varying, and correspondingly the energy line is also varying in this channel cross section. All right. Sorry, in this channel length. I'm sorry. Right. So what I do, we are going to develop what is called the direct step method to estimate the length of the gradually varied flow profile. See, our objective is to estimate the length of the gradually varied flow profile, right? How long does it take to change from this level to this level? So that is our objective. Okay. So we will use what is called the direct step method. So in this approach, what we do is we break up the entire surface profile into multiple depths, right? Right. We break it up into different flow depths. We know that the flow is changing from this this value to this value, okay, for example. And then my objective is to find out the delta x over which it changes from a certain value to the next value, right? My objective is I'll go from all the way from yn to y1. Each one will have its own delta x, right? If I keep summing up all these delta x's between two successive changes in water surface elevation, I'll get the total length, right? I'm interested in finding out the the length over which the water surface changes from, let us say, yn, y capital N, to y1. Okay. Instead of solving it as one step, what I do is I just break it up into smaller pieces. And this is a classic approach that is used typically. It's a numerical approximation, right? If I know this water surface elevation and this water surface elevation, I can break up that water surface elevation, the change from yn to y1, into smaller pieces, and then compute the delta x for each of these transitions, right? As yn changes to yn minus 1, I can find out the delta x here. Similarly, yn minus 1 to yn minus 2, I find out delta x here. Similarly, if I just keep going all along, I can keep finding out the delta x between every two successive transitions, and then sum up all these delta x's. That will give me the total length of this profile, right? Is that fairly clear? That my objective is to find the total length of the profile. So for that, I break it up into smaller pieces and estimate delta x between for each piece, and then sum up all the delta x's. That will give me the total length, right? So here, even when you look at the energy line, it'll have these components: the vi square by 2g, vi plus 1 square by 2g, when the depth is yi and yi plus 1. All of these will be used when we do this direct step method. The direct step method is just one of the popular methods to do this kind of computation with gradually varied flow profiles. There are many other methods available, but for this course, we will limit ourselves to only this direct step method. Okay, so this is the context in which I want you to understand this. So let us just go into this direct step method. So remember, if you remember from the earlier equation, we had developed dy by dx plus d by dx of v square by 2g equal to s naught minus sf, right? So can I not write this in other words? Can I not write it as dE by dx equal to s naught minus sf, right? Because y plus v square by 2g is our specific energy E, right? So I can write this expression, instead of writing it like in this form, I'll write it as dE by dx, where E is my specific energy, equal to s naught minus sf, right? So now this is a differential equation, but when I break it up into smaller pieces, when I discretize, like you saw in the previous slide, I have broken it up into smaller pieces. So now what I'll do, I'll write this equation dE by dx equal to s naught minus sf in in a finite difference form. You're all aware of this, right? So dE by dx, I'm going to write it as delta E by delta x equal to s naught minus sf bar, right? So when I go from this equation to this equation, I have removed this sf and replaced it with sf bar, right? So if you remember from the earlier slide, if you look at every point in this gradually varied flow profile, the energy slope is also changing, the water surface slope is also changing, right? So that is why I cannot use SF directly. When I have to numerically compute it, I have to compute the SF between 2 points, right? So so let us say you look at yi plus 1 and yi. So SF at this point will be something SFI or SFI plus 1. Here there will be another value of SF, right? Because at every point it is continuously changing. This SF value or the friction slope keeps changing. So I'll take the average friction slope between these 2 points. That becomes my SF bar, right? Otherwise I can't solve for it because it'll just remain in the equation. So I simplify this expression as a finite difference approximation, delta E by delta X equal to S naught minus SF bar. Or in other words, I can write delta X equal to EI plus 1 minus EI divided by S naught minus half SFI plus SFI plus 1. Is this okay? So this SF bar is simply half of SFI plus SFI plus 1. This friction slope can be estimated at every point. 1, 2, 3, 4, I plus 1, N minus 1, N, and so on, right? So it can be estimated everywhere. S naught is typically known, right? EI plus 1 and EI, we can very easily estimate, right? Because once I know the flow depth and the flow rate, I can find out V square by 2G, and I'll also know Y, right? So this is how I will estimate the delta X for uh, any two points in that gradually varied flow profile. I quickly estimate delta X, and then I move over that entire length, and I'm able to estimate the overall length. So EI, for example, will be simply YI plus Q square by 2G AI square, right? So this is fairly straightforward. If I know YI and I know Q and I know the channel cross section, I can find out EI very easily. And what about SFI? So this SF bar will be this. This equation is coming out of our Manning's equation, right? I'm just writing it in terms of N, Q, A, and R, right? So SF bar will be N square Q square by 2. This 2 is to take the average of 1 by A I plus 1 square R I plus 1 to the power 4 by 3 plus A I square R I 4 power 3 to the power 4 by 3. Okay, so that is SF bar and EI. So if all of these are known, I can just put them into this equation. I'll evaluate this E at both I and I plus 1. Okay, and this SF bar includes the SF at cross section I and I plus 1, right? It's included in this equation, right? So then I put all of this into this equation, and I get delta X. I just do this for every, I go from I equal to 1 to I equal to N, and I solve this entire thing. I get delta X for every breakup. I sum them all up, and I get my total length of the profile. Okay, so we'll quickly solve a problem, right? But before we solve that, there's a couple of useful hints that you need to remember. The calculations will always proceed upstream in the case of subcritical flows and downstream in supercritical flows. What do I mean by upstream and downstream, right? So if I have a supercritical flow, right, I'll go upstream, which means I'll go from the downstream point towards the upstream point. So in this case, I've demonstrated what it will be for a subcritical flow. So yi, y2, y3, yi, yi plus 1, and so on, yn minus 1, yn. But in this case, if the flow was supercritical, then we will go in this direction. The computation will go from this point, the upstream point, to the downstream point. In the case of subcritical flow, I'll go from the downstream point towards the upstream point. Okay, so that is one of the useful hints that you need to remember. Then these steps need not be in equal increments, right? If you remember, dy by dx tends to 0 as you approach y naught, right? So therefore, you can't take small steps as you approach. I mean, you can take slightly larger steps when the curvature is small. Okay, so the steps need not be in equal increments. And then typically what we do is we terminate the calculations at when y tends to approach y naught, because when y actually is equal to y naught, dy by dx becomes 0, right? So then it's very difficult to solve it when the slope itself is becoming 0. So we typically terminate it at 99% or 101% of y naught, right? So 1 plus or minus is because sometimes you will be approaching it from the from below, sometimes you will be approaching it from above, right? If it's an M1 curve, for example, you will be tending towards y naught from the higher side, whereas if it's an M2 curve, you will be tending towards y naught from the lower side. So in those cases, you go to 99% of y naught. If you're tending to it from the upper side, you tend to 101% of y naught. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward. Okay, and then of course the accuracy depends on the number of steps that you take, right? If you take a lot of steps, then your accuracy will be much better, right? And then if you take fewer steps, your accuracy will be that much worse. Okay, so let us quickly solve a problem, and then we can understand this much better. Okay, a river 100 meters wide and 3 meters deep has an average bed slope of 0.0005. Estimate the length of the GVF profile produced by a low dam which raises the water surface just upstream of it by 1.5 meters. Assume n equal to 0.035. Okay, so first of all, we need to visualize what this means. The river is flowing with a depth of 3 meters. Now this 3 meters depth, we'll assume it is the normal depth of this river, right? Then as I move towards the dam, the water surface increases from 3 to 4.5, right? It is, water surface is raised by 1.5. So it was at 3 meters and it has been raised by 1.5. So therefore, the water surface is changing from 3 to 4.5 meters, right? Okay, so now when we get to the solution, it's a very wide river. It's 100 meters wide and only 3 meters deep, right? So when you have a wide rectangular channel, your R becomes approximately equal to Y. Okay, I want you to find out why this is true. Okay, R becomes approximately equal to Y in a wide rectangular channel. Okay, this is fairly straightforward. So please do that when we meet next time, right? So then I can write, instead of writing capital Q, which is the total flow rate, I can write small q, which is the flow rate per unit width. Okay, it's a little simpler to write it. So Q equal to 1 by N, Y naught per 5 by 3, S naught per half. If you are wondering how we got Y naught per 5 by 3, it is simply A into R per 2 by 3, right? But A is B into Y. I have divided this equation, the original equation is capital Q. If I divide that by capital B, the width of the river, then I get small q, which is flow rate per unit width. And that A becomes B into Y naught divided by B. So Y naught into Y naught per 2 by 3, because R is approximately equal to Y, right? So if you have questions on this, please let me know, right? So Q is simply written this way: 1 by N, Y naught per 5 by 3, S naught per half. So if you put in all these terms, everything is known. N is known, Y naught is given 3 meters, S naught is also given. So you get the flow rate per unit width as 3.987 cubic meters per second per meter, right? So these units are very important here, right? The flow rate is flow rate per unit width. So it is cubic meters per second per meter. So the actual flow rate will be multiplied by 100 meters, because that is the width of the river. All right. Okay. So then you can also simply solve for the critical depth. Critical depth YC is Q square by G to the power 1 by 3. Now this again is for a rectangular channel. Because it's a rectangular channel, I'm quickly taking advantage of this fact and solving it, with a very easy. So this again you will get if you rewrite Q square T by G A cubed equal to 1. You will get this. So the critical depth, I find out it is 1.175 meters. Okay. So in this case, critical depth is 1.175, normal depth is 3 meters, and it is increasing towards from 3 to 4.5. So therefore, the profile will be an M1 curve, right? Downstream end, the depth is 4.5, the normal depth is 3, and the flow is happening from 3 to 4.5. So that is the region 1, which is above the normal depth level, NDL. So since Y is greater than Y naught greater than YC, the profile is an M1 curve. All right. So now we've established what the what slope it is and what curve it will be. Why is it a mild slope? Because the critical depth is less than the normal depth. Normal depth is 3 meter. Critical depth is 1.175. So therefore, it's a mild slope. And since the flow depth is greater than the normal depth level, it is an M1 curve. Okay. So now we are going to solve this problem with 10 steps, n equal to 10 steps, capital N. Okay. So yeah, this might be a little cluttered, but just bear with me. Remember the hint that was given, that when the flow is subcritical, this is a subcritical flow because Y naught is greater than YC, right? So when the flow is subcritical, you have to go from the downstream end towards the upstream end. The flow proceeds upstream, right? So I'm starting from the downstream end where the elevation is water surface elevation is 4.5 meters. Right, the water depth is 4.5 meters. I'm going from 4.5 to 3.03. Why have I stopped at 3.03? Because when I approach normal depth, dy by dx tends to 0, right? So I'm stopping at 101% of 3. So I'm stopping at 3.03. So I'm going in 10 steps, 4.3, 4.1, 3.9, 3.7. See, so far I'm taking equal steps, but as I approach the normal depth, I start taking smaller steps, 3.2, 3.1, 3.05, and then I finally stop at 3.03. Okay, so then for all of these depths, I find out capital V. How do I find out V? I know the flow rate, right? I know the flow rate per unit width. So let me just write that. So the flow rate per unit width is Q equal to V times Y, right? Because capital Q equal to V times B times Y. So flow rate per unit width will be Q equal to V times Y. So now this, all of these, we have just assumed some, values of Y for which I'm going to solve the delta X, right? So now I know Y at all the points. So at this value of Y, the value of velocity will be 0.886. How did I get this 0.886 meters per second? Simply by, I have already solved for small q, right? The flow rate per unit width. I divided by Y, I get V. So 0.886 meters per second. Similarly, for every value of Y, I find out what the velocity will be using this equation. Because remember, the flow rate is not changing, right? When Y changes, V changes. And these are all the different values of V. Okay. Once I know Y and V, I can find specific energy. It's simply Y plus V square by 2G. When I do that, I get all these different values of E. Y plus V square by 2G. Those are all these numbers. Okay. Then I compute delta E. Right. Delta E is E2 minus E1. Right. E2 minus E1. Now, what is E2 and what is E1 in this case? E2 is the downstream end. E1 is the upstream end. Right. So downstream end in this case is 4.5. Upstream end in this section is 4.3. Right. So I have to. Okay, I'm sorry. So delta E will be, okay, since I'm proceeding from the downstream end to the upstream end, this is E1, this is E2, E3, E4, E5, E6, E7, and so on, right? So E2 minus E1. E2 is 4.34. E1 is 4.54. So if I do E2 minus E1, I get a negative number. Similarly, here at the next line, E2 minus E1 will be 4.1482 minus 4.3438. So that is this number, minus 0.1956. And so I compute delta E that way. Then I have SF. What is SF? SF will be, if you remember the equation, Q equal to 1 by N Y to the power 5 by 3 and SF power half, right? So this is the assumption for gradually varied flow, that we replace S0 with SF, right? So now if you look at this equation, everything is known, right? Q, small q is known, we've already solved for it. Manning's roughness coefficient is known. Y, we have all these different values of Y. So we can very easily solve for SF. So I solve for SF for each of these depths. I solve for SF. I get these different values of SF, right? Then I find out SF bar. What is SF bar? SF1 plus SF2 divided by 2. So it is the average of these two terms. That is 1.4 into e power 10 power minus 4. Then the next one is the average of these two terms. That is 1.636. And then I compute that all the way down. Then I compute S0 minus SF bar. S0 is also already known, right? 0.0005. I do S0 minus SF. I get all these different values of S0 minus SF bar. Then I simply calculate delta X. What is delta X? Delta X is equal to delta E divided by S0 minus SF bar. When I do that, I get a negative number, minus 545 meters, right? So this negative sign denotes that we are going in the direction opposite to the flow, right? The flow is happening from 4.3 to 4.5, but because the flow is subcritical, we are going from the downstream end towards the upstream end, right? So therefore you get a negative number, but it only means that we are proceeding opposite to the direction of flow. Similarly, I calculate delta X for all these different values. Then you can compute X, right? So if 4.5 meters, if it is at location 0, here I just keep summing up all these values. I take the absolute value and sum it up. So in 545 meters, the water surface elevation has changed from 4.5 to 4.3. If you move another 581.5 meters, it is changing from 4.3 to 4.1. The cumulative distance is simply 545 plus 581.5, that is 1126. Then 1126 plus 634, 1760. 1760 plus 715, 2475, and so on. At the very end, I get 8,644 meters, right? So that's about 8.6 kilometers. So now remember, imagine this, the water surface elevation has changed from about 3 meters to 4.5 meters. 1.5 meters difference in elevation has happened over a distance of 8.6 kilometers, right? So now this tells you why we call it a gradually varied flow, right? So this is indeed a gradually varied flow profile. All right. So with that, I've come to an end to gradually varied flow profiles. There's a lot of material in this, so I would strongly urge you to pay very close attention to everything. We will go through these slides and the lecture material in class tomorrow. If you're not able to complete it, we will continue again in next week's lecture, because there's a lot of content in here, so I don't want to rush things. So we will, if we finish it, that's good, but if not, we will continue with this lecture on Tuesday with this material on next Tuesday as well. Okay, so as usual, if you have any questions, you can email me or send them to me by phone or WhatsApp, and let us meet on Friday. Thank you very much.